This week we're diving into modifying short row heels and peasant heels for better fit. As always, if you'd like to jump directly to a specific point in the video, there are links down in the description. Last week we compared short row heels and peasant heels and saw that because they have the same dimensions, they have the same fit. And because they have the same fit, they have the same fit issues. Now there are a number of ways of modifying each of these heels for a better fit. Today we'll be discussing the most common way of making modifications that works for both heels. The primary fit issue with this heel is that they are too snug across the heel diagonal. The secondary fit issue is that this type of heel doesn't allow directly for a difference in circumference between the leg and the foot. Now you can make modifications like this, but in today's video we'll just be addressing the snug heel diagonal. So let's get started. Socks with a short row heel or peasant heel have a tube of constant circumference for the leg and the foot. Because the leg is at a 90-degree angle with the foot, the length of the leg and the foot in front is shorter than the length of the leg and the foot around the outside. So the sock has to accommodate that shift in direction, but also that difference in length, and that's where the heel comes in. So the tube is split in half, and then it sort of hinges so that half of the tube can go up the leg and the other half can go in this direction. And then this gap is filled in by that wedge-shaped heel. The heel diagonal is where those fit issues occur. And the circumference of this heel diagonal is directly related to how wide the heel is and how deep it is. The standard for this type of heel is to use 50% of the sock stitches for the heel and to decrease or short row the heels down to until you have about 1/3 of the stitches left. So for an average 8-inch sock, you will have a heel that's 4 inches wide. It will end up being 2 inches deep, and this heel base here will be about 1.3 inches wide. The resulting heel diagonal ends up being 20% larger than the circumference of the sock tube. So what does this mean in real numbers? Well, for a 7-inch sock that will fit an 8-inch ankle, the heel diagonal will be about 4.4 inches. For an 8-inch sock, the diagonal will be about 9.6 inches. And for a 9-inch sock, it will be about 10.8 inches. So how do you figure out if the sock diagonal is going to fit you? So what you do is you measure your sock diagonal. You want to come around the back of the heel here at the base, and you want to measure across where the instep meets your ankle, and you take that measurement. So for this sock model, it's 12 inches in circumference. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply that by 0.8 in order to tell you what kind of negative ease you need, and that will be your target heel diagonal for your sock. So you multiply your sock circumference by 1.2, and you compare that to your heel diagonal that you multiplied by 0.8. If you increase the width and depth of the heel, you will increase the heel diagonal. So one way to increase the heel width is to increase the percentage of stitches used for the heel. These socks are both the same circumference. They're 8 inches in circumference. For this heel, I used 50% of the stitches. For this heel, I used 60% of the stitches. So as you increase the width of the heel, the depth of the heel will automatically increase, and so will the diagonal. Rather than decreasing down to 1/3 of the stitches that you've started with here, if you decrease down to the number of stitches you would have used here, so your target heel base of 1.25 to 1.5 inches in depth, that will give you even more depth here. If you look at it from the sides, you can see this one is probably more square. This one is pretty square. It's a little bit more, comes out a little bit more there, and that's because we've added some more length to it. It isn't perfectly square. it would have been square if we reduced down to 1/3 of these stitches, but we went a little further, so it gets a little more elongated, but that increases the heel diagonal. If you use this guideline of always reducing down to this heel width, regardless of how wide you make this, for every 10% you add to the width of the heel, you will gain in heel diagonal about 0.55 inches for a 7-inch sock, 0.65 inches for an 8-inch sock, and 0.75 inches for a 9-inch sock. So with this 60% heel, you can see that the corner of the heel encroaches in a little bit on the instep. Now, if you're doing plain stockinette, self-striping yarn or whatever, it's not going to be terribly noticeable. If you're using a stitch pattern that requires vertical continuity in the pattern, this may or may not be an aesthetic issue for you. You can see though with these two socks that the 60% of the stitches does add a little bit more room here. So it does add close to that 0.6 total inch circumference by using 60% of the stitches for the heel. What about more extreme percentages? Here is a sock that uses 75% of the stitches for the heel, and you can see how the instep is considerably narrowed here. This would be even more problematic if you have a stitch pattern that requires some vertical continuity. I made this one. This one is 7 inches in circumference up here. I made this one to fit me. But because my ankle is so narrow, if I did use 50% of the stitches and reduce down to 1/3, this heel base would barely be an inch wide. So when I used the 75 stitches here, I reduced down until this was 1.5 inches wide, which is something that fits my heel. So this is a 75% sock, but I reduced the heel base down to 1.5 inches. I didn't go down to that nearly 1 inch narrowness that a 50% sock would have had. And because I didn't go that far, then the heel isn't as long and it ends up being a little tighter. To actually have the best fit for me, I would have needed 85% of the socks stitches. So it would have encroached another, I think 6 stitches on the instep, which would have made that even narrower. So one of the disadvantages that I already spoke about was that as you increase the width of the heel, you're encroaching on the instep stitches. Now, depending on your yarn and your stitch pattern and exactly how many stitches you need to borrow from the instep in order to widen your heel and increase the heel diagonal, this may or may not be an issue, but it could be an aesthetic problem. Now, as you're working on perfecting the fit for these types of heels, a peasant heel has particular advantages because if you don't get the fit quite right, you can rip out that heel and then rework it. In fact, you can add depth and take depth away by increasing the number of plain rounds between decreased rounds if desired. You can't really do that with short row heels. The only place where you can do something like that with a short row heel is after you finish the first half of the heel, you could work several complete rounds before you began the second half of the heel. Now with the true afterthought peasant heel, one advantage is that if you need to make the heel wider, you can just pick out additional stitches to do so. With the short row heel and the forethought peasant heel, you have to plan ahead of time how wide that heel is going to be. And so you're more limited as to what you can do once you've established what the width of that heel is. If you really need to widen it, you have to rip back the sock until just before the heel was started. So as you've seen, this type of modification can work, and it can work really well, but it may not be your first choice for modification. So next week we're going to explore a different way of increasing your heel width and heel diagonal without encroaching on the instep stitches. But if you have any questions about today's video or comments, or if you have any suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below. If you'd like to see all of my sock related videos, there's a playlist right here you can click on and see all of the titles. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I'd really love it. You can hover over my face here and then click on the subscribe button, or if you're on a mobile device, you tap on my face and then hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.